The cloudy sky darkened the morning as a car, headlights off, stopped at the edge of the trail. The door opened, a box was tossed into the wet grass, and the engine roared away. Inside, German Shepherd puppies huddled in silence. Hours later, the box, swollen from moisture, split open and one of the pups fell out, sliding down the slope to the creek. The current swept him away instantly. Above, a baby was crawling through the yard, slipping through the loose fence, unnoticed. Without direction, the baby reached the edge of the cliff and stopped, staring intently at something in the water. And then, love animal stories. Subscribe now so you never miss one. Thanks for being with us. Now, back to the story. The morning sky over Willow Creek, Tennessee, remained hidden behind indecisive clouds that couldn't determine whether to bring rain or merely shade. In this small rural community, where everyone seemed to know everyone else, life followed an almost unchanging routine. Children weren't yet on summer break, adults went about their business without significant variations, and Saturday mornings were traditionally quiet. But on this particular morning, a newly settled family was still trying to adapt to the rhythms of their new home. Sarah and Ethan Parker had made a sudden move from Nashville to this countryside retreat, seeking in its isolation an opportunity for a fresh start. They were a young couple marked by a turbulent beginning to parenthood. Their baby boy, Mason, just over a year old, required constant attention, and the couple was struggling to find balance between their need for emotional reconstruction and the demands of their new rural routine. The house, hastily rented, was located near an old farm trail that descended toward a preserved woodland area, crossed by a stream with calm waters during dry periods but treacherous currents on rainy days. The region's topography, with its small slopes and embankments, made the surroundings both enchanting and dangerous. The dense vegetation concealed paths and sounds that sometimes confused the senses. It was in this setting that, at the end of a muggy dawn, a cardboard box was abandoned near the entrance to the trail. Inside were newborn puppies, fragile, defenseless, and silent. The sound of the engine quickly driving away was the only witness to the abandonment. "I still can't believe we did this," Sarah said, gazing out the kitchen window at the misty morning landscape. Her fingers nervously tapped against her coffee mug, a habit she'd developed since their hasty departure from city life. Ethan approached from behind, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "We needed this, Sarah. After everything that happened, Mason deserves a peaceful place to grow up." Their voices were hushed, as they often were these days, careful not to disturb the fragile peace they'd found here. The trauma of Mason's difficult birth and Sarah's subsequent depression had left invisible scars that both were trying to heal. The countryside was supposed to be their remedy, a place where the constant noise and demands of urban life couldn't reach them. "I just worry that we're too isolated," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on the tree line that bordered their property. "What if something happens? The nearest hospital is 40 minutes away." "Nothing's going to happen," Ethan reassured her, though his own voice carried a hint of uncertainty that he tried to mask. "And Mrs. Reynolds next door said she was a nurse for 30 years. We're not completely alone out here." As they spoke, neither noticed Mason, who had awakened early and was now crawling determinedly across the worn wooden floor. In recent weeks, he'd developed a fascination with the windows, often pulling himself up to stand and peer out at the world beyond the glass. He was a serene child, with thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. But there was something different about his behavior that morning, an urgency that neither parent detected. As the hours advanced, the cardboard box near the trail began to give way under the weight of moisture. One of the puppies, a small golden retriever mix with unusual markings around his eyes that resembled a mask, rolled out. Disoriented, he tried to stand on the wet slope, but his tiny legs couldn't find purchase. Slowly, inevitably, he slid toward the edge of the stream. The current, though contained, was strong enough to threaten such a small, powerless body. The puppy fell into the water. He struggled, not understanding what was happening, instinctively clinging to twigs and roots along the bank. His barks weren't loud, but they contained the desperation of those who don't yet know the world, but already have to fight for their place in it. Back at the house, Sarah had stepped into the bathroom for a quick shower, believing Mason was safely playing in his gated area where Ethan was folding laundry. But Ethan, receiving an urgent call from his boss about a remote project he was managing, had stepped onto the front porch for better reception, assuming Mason was still asleep in his crib. In that brief window of miscommunication, Mason discovered the partially open back door. A sudden impulse drove him toward it, guided by sounds that no adult had noticed. Without knowing what he was searching for, he crossed the yard, navigated the uneven terrain, and reached the loose wooden fence. In moments, he was beyond the protection of home. His instinct to seek out the source of the sound seemed greater than any fear or motor limitation. "I just need 10 more minutes to upload the files," Ethan said into his phone, pacing the front porch. "The internet connection out here isn't what we're used to in the city." Inside, Sarah emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and feeling refreshed. "Mason, sweetie, Mommy's going to make you breakfast now," she called out, expecting to hear his familiar babbling from the living room. The silence that greeted her didn't immediately register as alarming. Mason often became quiet when focused on a toy. It was during this slow and silent journey that fate did its work. Mason reached the edge of the embankment and spotted something moving in the water below. He stopped, watching. The puppy's sounds, though weak, awakened a type of attention that only someone still learning about the world could offer. Mason sat down, leaning dangerously forward. Sarah, now dressed and growing concerned by the unusual silence, called out again. "Mason, where are you playing, buddy?" She checked his crib, then the living room, her heart beginning to race when she realized the baby gate was still in place, but her son was nowhere to be seen. "Ethan!" she called, rushing toward the front door. "Is Mason with you?" The look on Ethan's face answered her question before his words could. "I thought he was with you." Their eyes simultaneously fell on the partially open back door, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Sarah's scream came a moment later as she bolted through the door, her eyes frantically scanning the yard. "Mason! Mason!" The terror in her voice echoed across the property. Ethan was right behind her, already on his phone dialing for help, when Sarah spotted movement at the edge of their property line. Her maternal instinct propelled her forward with a speed she didn't know she possessed. Racing down the slippery path, she could finally see her son sitting at the edge of the embankment, peering intently at something below. Mason's movements were interrupted by his mother's cry. The sight of her son at the edge of the embankment made Sarah forget everything else. She ran to him, and as she pulled him back to safety, saw what had attracted him. The puppy, clinging to a submerged root, about to be swept away. Without thinking, Sarah carefully descended to the closest point to the water, stretching out cautiously until she could reach the animal. As she rescued him, she realized he was barely breathing. They returned to the house together, Mason in one arm, the puppy wrapped in an improvised towel in the other. Ethan met them halfway, his face pale with fear that transformed to relief when he saw them both safe. The following minutes were tense, but the puppy survived. He was fragile but determined. The family, still in reconstruction, gained a new member that day. "What were you thinking?" Ethan asked later, his voice tight with residual fear as they sat in their small living room. Mason was napping peacefully in his playpen, exhausted from the morning's adventure, while the puppy rested in a makeshift bed of towels nearby. "I wasn't thinking," Sarah admitted, her hands still trembling slightly. "I just reacted. When I saw that puppy about to be swept away, I couldn't just let it happen." Ethan shook his head, but his expression had softened. "You could have both been hurt. That embankment isn't stable, especially after all the rain we've had." "But we weren't hurt," Sarah said, reaching out to touch his hand. "And look at them both. It's like they were meant to find each other." As if on cue, the puppy stirred in his sleep, making tiny whimpering sounds. Mason, though still asleep, turned his head toward the sound. "He needs a name," Sarah said, watching the golden fur rise and fall with each breath. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying his wife's face. It had been months since he'd seen her eyes light up like this. Despite the fear and chaos of the morning, something had shifted. "I suppose he does," he finally conceded. "Any ideas?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen in longer than he cared to remember. "I was thinking chance, because that's what he's getting. A second chance." Ethan nodded slowly, realizing that perhaps they all were. As the afternoon sun finally broke through the indecisive clouds, casting golden light across their small living room, the new family of four settled into an unexpected peace. None of them could know yet just how significant this day would prove to be, or how the bond forming between a baby boy and a rescued puppy would change not only their lives, but eventually the lives of many others in Willow Creek. Outside, the box containing the remaining puppies sat forgotten in the growing sunshine, its cardboard edges beginning to dry. Inside the Parker home, decisions would soon need to be made about those other abandoned lives. But for now, in this moment of newfound connection, tomorrow's challenges could wait. In the days that followed, the bond between Mason and Chance became increasingly evident. The puppy, still without an official name registration, but firmly Chance in the Parker household, spent hours lying beside the child, reacting to each movement with unusual attention. Mason, previously introverted and minimally responsive, began to interact more, smile more, and make sounds that had been rare before. The family, surprised, observed this silent but profound transformation. Mason seemed to gain courage and a desire to explore when the puppy was nearby. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah whispered to Ethan one evening as they watched Mason giggling while Chance gently licked his fingers. "It's like they have their own language." Ethan nodded, the worry lines that had become permanent fixtures on his face beginning to soften. Dr. Anderson mentioned that Mason might benefit from having a pet, but I never expected this level of connection. Mason had been born 6 weeks premature, and his early arrival had complicated things in ways the young couple hadn't anticipated. While physically healthy now, he had shown delays in certain developmental milestones, particularly in social engagement and communication. The pediatrician had been monitoring his progress closely, concerned but not yet alarmed. "Should we tell the others about the remaining puppies?" Sarah asked, her mind turning to the cardboard box they'd found abandoned. They had returned to rescue the other puppies, 3 more golden retriever mixes with varying markings, and were temporarily housing them in a makeshift pen in their garage until more permanent arrangements could be made. "I posted about them on the community board at Wilson's General Store," Ethan replied. "And I spoke with Dr. Evans about getting them checked out. He said he could see them next Tuesday." Dr. Evans was the local veterinarian, a gruff but kind-hearted man who had been practicing in Willow Creek for nearly 30 years. His clinic was a 15-minute drive from their home, one of the closer services available to them in their rural setting. The next morning, Sarah decided it was time for Mason's scheduled checkup with Dr. Anderson, the pediatrician in the neighboring town of Cedar Ridge. As she prepared the diaper bag, she hesitated before picking up her son. "Ethan," she called out to her husband, who was checking his emails at the kitchen table. "I'm thinking of asking Dr. Anderson about Chance, about what's happening between him and Mason. Do you think that's crazy?" Ethan looked up from his laptop, considering her question. "Not crazy at all. The change in Mason is obvious, even to me. Maybe there's something to it that could help his development." Sarah nodded, relieved that he agreed. "Can you keep an eye on the other puppies while we're gone? I should be back by early afternoon." The drive to Cedar Ridge took nearly 40 minutes, winding through hills and valleys that showcased the natural beauty of eastern Tennessee. Mason, usually fussy during car rides, seemed unusually content, gazing out the window at the passing scenery. Dr. Emily Anderson's practice was housed in a renovated Victorian home on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, its wraparound porch and bright blue door making it seem more like a welcoming home than a medical facility. The waiting room, decorated with children's artwork and comfortable furniture, was quiet that morning with only one other family waiting. "Mason Parker?" The nurse called his name with a warm smile. "Dr. Anderson is ready for you." The examination proceeded as usual, with Dr. Anderson checking Mason's growth, reflexes, and overall health. But when she began the developmental assessment portion, she paused, her expression curious. "Has something changed at home, Sarah?" she asked, watching as Mason responded to a series of simple commands with unprecedented focus. "I'm seeing significant improvements in his engagement levels compared to our last visit." Sarah hesitated, then told her about finding Chance, about the immediate connection between the puppy and her son, and about the changes they'd witnessed in Mason's behavior since. That day, rather than dismissing her observations, Dr. Anderson leaned forward, clearly interested. "Actually, there's growing research about the benefits of animal-assisted therapy for children with developmental delays. The right kind of interaction with animals can stimulate neural pathways in ways that human interaction sometimes can't." "So you don't think I'm imagining things?" Sarah asked, relief evident in her voice. "Not at all," Dr. Anderson assured her. "In fact, I'd like to refer you to a colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Bennett. He specializes in developmental psychology and has done some groundbreaking work with animal-assisted interventions. He's based in Knoxville, but I believe he does telehealth consultations for initial assessments." Sarah left the appointment with a referral in hand and a newfound hope brightening her steps. She stopped at the local pharmacy to pick up some vitamins Dr. Anderson had recommended, then decided to treat herself to a coffee at the small cafe across the street before heading home. As she sat at a corner table, watching Mason play with a toy she'd brought along, her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Vet called. Can take puppies tomorrow instead of Tuesday. Okay if I confirm." She quickly replied with a "yes, perfect," and was about to put her phone away when an older woman at the next table caught her eye. "I couldn't help but notice your little one," the woman said, her silver hair framing a face lined with experience but bright with kindness. "He has very thoughtful eyes." Under normal circumstances, Sarah might have offered a polite smile and turned away, not particularly comfortable with strangers commenting on her child. But something about the woman's gentle demeanor put her at ease. "Thank you," she replied. "He's been through a lot, but he's doing well." The woman nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Sometimes the quieter ones are observing more than we realize. I worked with children for many years. You learn to recognize the different ways they connect with the world." "Were you a teacher?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Among other things," the woman smiled, "I specialized in working with children who needed alternative ways to communicate and connect. My name is Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Jenkins." Sarah, "Parker," she responded, extending her hand. "And this is Mason." Their conversation flowed easily, with Eleanor sharing stories from her years working in special education and child development. By the time Sarah realized she needed to head home, she felt as though she'd made her first real connection in their new community. "It was lovely meeting you both," Eleanor said as they prepared to leave. "I hope our paths cross again soon." Back at home, Sarah found Ethan in the garage, fashioning a more comfortable enclosure for the puppies using some spare lumber and chicken wire. Chance was nearby, watching the proceedings with apparent interest, occasionally glancing toward the house as if checking for Mason. "How did the appointment go?" Ethan asked, setting down his hammer. "Really well," Sarah replied, adjusting Mason on her hip. "Actually, better than well. Dr. Anderson noticed the changes in Mason right away, and she's referring us to a specialist who works with animal-assisted therapy." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "So this connection between Mason and Chance, it's actually a recognized thing?" "Apparently so," Sarah nodded, "and I met someone interesting at the cafe in town, a former special education specialist named Eleanor. She seemed to understand exactly what I was describing about Mason without me having to explain much." That evening, as they sat on their small back porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple, Chance curled up beside Mason's play blanket, both of them dozing peacefully. Sarah couldn't help but feel that despite the challenges and uncertainties they still faced, they had somehow stumbled upon exactly what their family needed. "I never would have predicted this," Ethan said softly, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "When we left Nashville, I thought we were just running away from bad memories, but now it feels like we were running toward something instead." Sarah leaned into his embrace, watching as Chance's ears twitched in his sleep, responding to some sound too faint for human ears. "I know what you mean. It's like pieces are falling into place that I didn't even know were missing." The next morning brought their first appointment with Dr. Evans, the veterinarian. Loading 4 puppies into their SUV proved to be a chaotic endeavor, with Chance being particularly reluctant to be separated from Mason. "I guess he's coming too," Sarah laughed, as Mason firmly held onto Chance's soft fur, both of them looking at her with matching expressions that somehow conveyed they weren't going to be separated. Dr. Evans's clinic was a modest building on the outskirts of Willow Creek, surrounded by large oak trees that provided ample shade in the parking area. A hand-painted sign reading Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic hung above the entrance, the lettering faded but still legible. Inside, the reception area was clean but dated, with worn linoleum flooring and chairs that had seen better days. A large bulletin board covered one wall, filled with pet adoption notices, lost and found posters, and business cards for local pet services. "You must be the Parkers," a young woman behind the counter greeted them warmly. "Dr. Evans mentioned you'd be bringing in some rescued puppies, and who's this little fellow?" she added, smiling at Mason. "This is our son, Mason," Sarah replied, "and the puppy he's practically glued to is Chance. We found him and his siblings abandoned near our property last week." The receptionist's expression darkened briefly. "Unfortunately, that happens more often than you'd think around here. Some people still haven't gotten the message about spaying and neutering their pets, but these little ones are lucky you found them." They didn't have to wait long before being ushered into an examination room, where Dr. Evans, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and weathered hands, was waiting. His initial gruffness quickly gave way to gentle efficiency as he examined each puppy in turn. "They're all in surprisingly good health, considering," he commented as he checked the last of the siblings. "Probably about 7 weeks old, which means they can be properly weaned now. Golden Retriever mix, most likely with some Border Collie or Australian Shepherd, based on these markings. When it was Chance's turn, Dr. Evans spent extra time examining his ears, his expression thoughtful. "This one's interesting," he said, more to himself than to the Parkers. "His ear structure is slightly different from his siblings. I'd like to run a quick hearing test, if that's all right with you." Sarah and Ethan exchanged glances, but nodded their agreement. What followed was a series of sounds at different frequencies that Dr. Evans produced using various instruments. Chance's reactions were immediate and precise, even to sounds so faint that the humans in the room couldn't detect them. "Well now," Dr. Evans said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I haven't seen this in quite some time. Your puppy here appears to have hyperacusis, exceptionally acute hearing, well beyond the normal range even for canines. It's rare but not unheard of." "Is it a problem?" Sarah asked, concerned. "Will it hurt him?" Dr. Evans shook his head. "Not a problem at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. Dogs with this condition often make excellent service or therapy animals, particularly for people with specific needs. They can detect subtle changes in their environment that other dogs might miss." As they drove home with all 4 puppies, Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities. The specialist Dr. Anderson had referred them to, the revelation about Chance's extraordinary hearing, the coincidental meeting with Eleanor, who specialized in alternative communication methods for children. It felt as though invisible threads were weaving together, creating a pattern she was just beginning to discern. "Ethan," she said as they turned onto the gravel road leading to their house, "I think there's something special happening here. Something beyond just a boy and his dog." Ethan glanced at her, then at the rearview mirror where he could see Mason in his car seat, one hand resting gently on Chance's head. "I think you might be right," he replied softly, "and for once, I'm not worried about what comes next." The telehealth consultation with Dr. Michael Bennett was scheduled for the following week, giving the Parkers time to observe and document the interactions between Mason and Chance. Sarah had started keeping a journal, noting specific behaviors and responses that seemed significant. What had begun as simple observations quickly filled page after page with remarkable details. "Look at this," Sarah said to Ethan one evening, pointing to a series of entries from the past 3 days. "Chance always alerts about 10 seconds before Mason wakes up from his nap. It's like he can hear Mason's breathing pattern change or something." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, scanning the neatly written notes. "And this one, when the delivery truck came yesterday, I didn't even hear it turn onto our road, but Chance was already at the window before the driver honked." The other puppies had found homes with carefully selected families in neighboring communities. Dr. Evans had helped connect them with responsible pet owners, even arranging for discounted vaccinations and spay-neuter services. Only Chance remained, now officially part of the Parker family, his presence becoming as essential as any human member. On Tuesday morning, Sarah set up her laptop on the kitchen table for the video call with Dr. Bennett. Mason sat in his high chair nearby, happily mashing banana pieces while Chance lay attentively at the chair's base, occasionally glancing up when Mason dropped food his way. Dr. Bennett appeared on screen promptly at 10 a.m., a man in his early 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. "Mrs. Parker, it's nice to meet you," he greeted her. "And this must be Mason." "Hello there, young man." Sarah smiled, adjusting the laptop so that both she and Mason were visible. "Thank you for making time for us, Dr. Bennett. Dr. Anderson thought you might have some insights into what we're experiencing." "Emily sent over her notes, and I'm intrigued by what she described," Dr. Bennett replied. "Tell me about this special connection you've observed between Mason and your new puppy." For the next 45 minutes, Sarah shared their experiences. occasionally demonstrating with Mason and Chance right there in the kitchen. Dr. Bennett asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and watched with obvious interest as Chance responded to Mason's subtle cues, some so subtle that even Sarah hadn't noticed them until Dr. Bennett pointed them out. "What you're describing," Dr. Bennett said when Sarah had finished, "aligns with some fascinating research on intuitive bonding between children with developmental variations and specially attuned animals. The fact that your veterinarian identified this puppy as having hyperacusis makes it even more significant." "So, you think there's something real happening here? It's not just wishful thinking on my part?" Sarah asked, still seeking confirmation that what she was witnessing had validity beyond a mother's hopeful observation. "It's very real," Dr. Bennett assured her. "In fact, I'd like to connect you with a colleague of mine in Knoxville who runs a program called Pause for Connection. They train service and therapy animals specifically for children with various needs. Given what you've described about Chance's natural abilities, he might be an excellent candidate for formal training." Sarah's heart raced at the possibility. "You think Chance could be an actual service dog for Mason?" "With the right training, absolutely," Dr. Bennett nodded. "And the beautiful thing is that they've already formed their own bond naturally. Most service animal placements require extensive introduction and adjustment periods, but you're already well beyond that stage." After the call ended, Sarah immediately phoned Ethan at work to share Dr. Bennett's insights. His initial skepticism had long since faded, replaced by a growing excitement about the possibilities ahead for their son. "He's sending information about the Knoxville program," Sarah explained. "But there's a waiting list, and it's expensive." "Like really expensive, Ethan?" There was a pause on the line before Ethan responded. "We'll figure it out, Sarah. If this can help Mason, we'll find a way." Later that afternoon, Sarah decided to take Mason and Chance for a walk through the neighboring fields. The summer heat had begun to give way to early hints of fall, with a pleasant breeze rustling through the tall grasses. Mason was securely strapped into his carrier on Sarah's back, while Chance trotted alongside them, occasionally darting ahead to investigate an interesting scent before returning to their side. As they approached the edge of the woods where the old farm trail began, Chance suddenly stopped, his ears perked forward, body tense and alert. A low growl emerged from his throat, not aggressive, but clearly a warning. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, immediately halting. Mason, who had been babbling happily, also went quiet, as if sensing the change in Chance's demeanor. The puppy moved in front of them, positioning himself between Sarah and whatever had caught his attention. His growl intensified slightly, and his eyes remained fixed on a point ahead on the trail. Sarah took a step back, instinctively protective of Mason. "Chance, come," she commanded softly, not wanting to trigger any aggression in the still young dog. To her relief, Chance obeyed, backing up while keeping his gaze fixed ahead. A moment later, a massive fallen tree branch came crashing down across the path, exactly where they would have been walking if Chance hadn't stopped them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized what had just happened. Chance had somehow heard the wood cracking before it fell, detecting a danger that was imperceptible to human ears. He had protected them from what could have been a serious injury. That evening, when Ethan returned from work, Sarah recounted the incident, with still shaking hands. "He saved us, Ethan. That branch was huge. It could have hit Mason." Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, his own face pale at the thought of what might have happened. "I knew he was special, but this is something else entirely." Dr. Bennett was right, Sarah murmured against his shoulder. "Chance isn't just a pet. He's already acting as a service dog, even without formal training." The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to their door. Sarah was washing breakfast dishes when a knock came, causing Chance to bark once before running to the entrance, tail wagging. "Coming!" Sarah called, wiping her hands on a dish towel and adjusting Mason in his high chair before heading to the door. She opened it to find Eleanor Jenkins, the woman she'd met at the cafe in Cedar Ridge, standing on their porch with a warm smile and a small gift bag in hand. "Eleanor, what a surprise!" Sarah exclaimed, genuinely pleased but confused by the unexpected visit. "How did you find us?" "Small communities have no secrets, my dear," Eleanor chuckled. "I mentioned meeting you to Mabel at the pharmacy, and she told me you were the new family in the old Wilson place." She glanced down at Chance, who was sniffing her shoes with interest. "And this must be the special puppy you told me about." Sarah stepped aside, inviting her in. "Please, come in. We were just finishing breakfast." Eleanor followed her into the kitchen, her eyes lighting up when she saw Mason. "Hello there, young man. My, you've grown since I saw you last week." To Sarah's surprise, Mason looked directly at Eleanor and offered a small smile, a response he typically reserved for his parents and more recently, Chance. "He likes you," Sarah observed, watching as Eleanor set her gift bag on the table and approached Mason with a gentle, unhurried manner. "Children know when someone genuinely sees them," Eleanor replied simply. She reached into the bag and pulled out a small, colorful book. "I brought something for Mason. It's a sensory book I designed years ago for my students. The different textures and sounds help develop tactile awareness and auditory discrimination." Sarah accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "That's incredibly thoughtful, Eleanor, thank you." As they settled at the kitchen table with coffee, Eleanor's gaze kept returning to Chance, who had positioned himself at Mason's side, occasionally responding to sounds from outside that Sarah couldn't detect. "Your puppy has exceptional hearing," Eleanor noted, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with interest. Sarah nodded, no longer surprised by Chance's abilities. The vet confirmed it. He called it hyperacusis, hearing that's far more acute than normal. Eleanor's expression shifted subtly, a flash of recognition crossing her features. "I suspected as much. In my former work, I had some experience with specially abled animals. They can perceive things we can't even imagine." "Former work?" Sarah questioned, realizing she still knew very little about this woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in their lives. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee before responding. "I wasn't just a special education teacher, Sarah. For most of my career, I trained service animals for children with various needs, particularly those with communication challenges or sensory processing differences." Sarah nearly dropped her mug. You train service dogs professionally?" Eleanor smiled at her reaction. "For over 30 years. I retired about 5 years ago and moved back to this area to be near my sister. But yes, that was my life's work." That's an incredible coincidence," Sarah stammered, her mind racing with the implications. "We just had a consultation with a specialist yesterday who recommended a service dog program for Mason, specifically because of his connection with Chance." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps not entirely a coincidence. Word travels in small communities, and when Mabel mentioned a young family with a special child and an unusually attentive puppy, she shrugged. Professional curiosity got the better of me." For the next hour, they talked as Chance demonstrated his natural responses to Mason's needs, alerting when Mason began to show signs of overstimulation, retrieving a dropped toy without being commanded, and positioning himself between Mason and the edge of his high chair when the child leaned too far to one side. "He's doing this all instinctively," Eleanor observed, clearly impressed. "Most service dogs require months of intensive training to develop these responses. Your Chance seems to have an innate understanding of what Mason needs. But he's still just a puppy himself," Sarah pointed out. "He gets distracted, plays too roughly sometimes. He's not consistently reliable yet." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. That's where training comes in. It's not about teaching him to care for Mason. He's already doing that naturally. It's about refining those instincts, making them more consistent, teaching him to distinguish between levels of urgency. The program in Knoxville has a waiting list, Sarah said, the disappointment evident in her voice. And even then, it's expensive. We're still recovering financially from Mason's medical bills and our move. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching as Chance gently nudged Mason's hand away from the edge of the high-chair tray, preventing a cup from being knocked over. Then she looked directly at Sarah, a decision visibly forming behind her eyes. "What if I told you I could train him?" she proposed. "Not officially through an organization. I'm retired after all, but I still have all my skills, my knowledge, and quite a bit of equipment stored away in my basement." Sarah stared at her, hardly daring to hope. "You would do that for us, but you barely know us." Eleanor's smile was warm but determined. "I know enough. I know that this child and this dog have formed a connection that most trainers only dream of establishing. I know that you and your husband are dedicated to giving your son every opportunity to thrive. And I know that after 5 years of retirement, I miss the work that gave my life its greatest meaning." "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Say you'll think about it and discuss it with your husband," Eleanor replied practically. "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything. We should start with proper evaluations, set realistic goals. If Chance truly has the potential I think he does, we can develop a training plan tailored specifically to Mason's needs." By the time Eleanor left that afternoon, promising to return the following day with some preliminary assessment tools, Sarah felt as though the universe had somehow aligned to bring exactly the right people into their lives at exactly the right moment. When Ethan returned from work, she shared Eleanor's unexpected visit and even more unexpected offer with a mixture of excitement and cautious optimism. "It seems almost too perfect," Ethan said, understandably wary after their previous experiences had taught them that good. Fortune often came with hidden complications. What would she want in return? "That's just it," Sarah replied. "She doesn't want anything. She said she misses the work, that seeing Mason and Chance together reminded her of why she became a trainer in the first place." They were sitting on the back porch watching as Mason and Chance played on a blanket in the early evening light. The bond between them was undeniable, beautiful in its simplicity and profound in its impact. "I think we should at least hear what she has to say tomorrow," Sarah continued. "See her credentials, understand her approach. We don't have to commit to anything right away." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on their son, who was giggling as Chance gently nuzzled his neck. "Agreed. But Sarah, if this is legitimate, if she's really who she says she is and can do what she claims—" "I know," Sarah said softly. "It would change everything." Neither of them could have predicted just how true those words would prove to be, or how quickly their lives would transform in the days ahead. As the sun set behind the Tennessee hills, casting long shadows across their yard, the small family remained together in peaceful anticipation of possibilities they were only beginning to understand. What they didn't know was that another significant change was already on the horizon, one that would test the strength of their newfound hope and the depth of the bond forming between a boy and his extraordinary dog. Eleanor's assessment of Chance confirmed what the Parkers had already begun to suspect. The puppy possessed natural abilities far beyond those of an average dog. Over the course of several weeks, a training routine was established. Eleanor would visit 3 times a week, bringing equipment and exercises tailored specifically to enhance Chance's innate talents while focusing on Mason's particular needs. "He's responding faster than any dog I've ever trained," Eleanor remarked one afternoon as they watched Chance complete a complex retrieval task. "It's as if he's been waiting for this direction all along." Sarah nodded, adjusting Mason on her hip. "I've been reading the books you recommended about canine cognition. The part about how some dogs seem predisposed to certain types of work, it describes Chance perfectly. The changes in their household dynamic were subtle but significant. Mason's pediatrician had noted continued improvements in his responsiveness and engagement during their monthly checkups. He had begun making more consistent eye contact, not just with Chance, but increasingly with his parents and Eleanor, as, well, his babbling had developed more varied intonations, occasionally even resembling simple words. Ethan had initially maintained a cautious distance from the training sessions, his practical nature making him wary of investing too much hope too quickly. But as the evidence of progress became undeniable, he found himself increasingly involved, even building specialized equipment based on Eleanor's specifications during his weekends. "I never thought I'd be constructing obstacle courses in my backyard," he joked one Saturday, hammering together a small ramp designed to teach Chance to navigate different surfaces while staying attentive to Mason. "My colleagues think I've gone full country living," Sarah laughed, passing him another nail. "Would you rather be stuck in that Nashville apartment, both of us working 60-hour weeks and barely seeing Mason?" The question was rhetorical. They both knew the answer. Despite the challenges of their new rural life, neither of them regretted the decision to leave the city behind. Here, surrounded by nature and freed from the relentless pace of urban professional life, they had found something more valuable than career advancement. October arrived, painting the Tennessee hills in brilliant hues of red and gold. The Parkers had settled into a comfortable routine, their days structured around Mason's needs and Chance's training, their evenings peaceful in a way their previous life had never allowed. It was during this period of stability that the letter arrived, an official-looking envelope addressed to current residents rather than to them by name. Ethan opened it one evening after dinner, his expression gradually darkening as he read the contents. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. He handed her the letter without comment. It was from a property management company they'd never heard of, informing them that the house they were renting had been sold to a development corporation. Their lease, which had been on a month-to-month basis since their hasty relocation, would terminate in 30 days. They were welcome to apply for housing in the new residential community that would be built, but construction wouldn't begin for at least 6 months. "They can't do this," Sarah protested, though the rational part of her mind knew that legally they absolutely could. "We have a life here now. Mason has doctors nearby. Eleanor's helping with Chance's training. We can't just leave." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah recognized as a sign of his mounting stress. "I'll call Mr. Wilson tomorrow. Maybe there's been some mistake." But there had been no mistake. Their elderly landlord, facing mounting medical bills and an offer too generous to refuse, had indeed sold the property to Horizon Development Group, a company planning to convert much of the rural area into an upscale residential community. Mr. Wilson was apologetic but firm. The sale was final, and the Parkers would need to find new accommodations. "I've started looking at rentals," Ethan said 3 days later, spreading printouts across their kitchen table after Mason had gone to bed. "There's not much available in Willow Creek itself, but I found a few possibilities in Cedar Ridge." Sarah examined the listings without much enthusiasm. "This one might work," she said, pointing to a small house on the outskirts of town. "It's close to Dr. Anderson's office, at least." Ethan nodded, making a note on the page. "I'll call about it tomorrow. The rent is higher than we're paying now, but we can make it work." Their search for a new home continued with increasing urgency. As the days passed, Cedar Ridge offered more options than Willow Creek, but none that perfectly matched their needs. Either the location was inconvenient, the house too small, or the rent beyond their budget. Finally, with their deadline looming, they settled on a duplex in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from their current home. "It's not ideal," Ethan admitted as they drove back from signing the rental agreement. "But it's clean, the landlord seems reasonable, and it's close enough that we can keep Mason's medical team and continue working with Eleanor." Sarah stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar landscape roll by. "I guess we should be grateful we found anything at all," she said, trying to sound positive despite the heaviness in her chest. It wasn't until they were discussing moving logistics that evening that the other issue came to light. "I should probably mention something about the new place," Ethan said hesitantly. "There's a clause in the lease about pets." Sarah looked up sharply from the box she was packing. "What kind of clause?" "A no pets clause," Ethan admitted, "with an exception for certified service animals." The implications hung in the air between them. Chance, despite his remarkable progress with Eleanor's training, was not yet officially certified as a service dog. The process typically took months, sometimes years, and required evaluation by recognized organizations. "We can't leave him behind," Sarah said, her voice tight with emotion. "He's family now, and Mason needs him." "I know," Ethan assured her. "I'm not suggesting we abandon him. Maybe Eleanor can help expedite the certification process, or maybe the landlord will make an exception if we explain the situation." But when they approached their new landlord, Mr. Jenkins, no relation to Eleanor despite the shared surname, his response was discouraging. "I sympathize with your situation," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But rules are rules. My insurance has strict limitations regarding animals on the property. Without official certification, I simply can't make an exception." Their options dwindling and their deadline approaching, the Parkers found themselves faced with an impossible choice: secure housing for their family or keep the dog that had become essential to their son's well-being. It was Eleanor who offered a potential solution during her next training session with Chance. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, as they watched Chance guide Mason away from the edge of the porch steps. "What if I took Chance temporarily, just until you can find more suitable housing or complete his certification?" Sarah's immediate reaction was relief, followed quickly by concern. "That's incredibly generous, Eleanor, but are you sure? He's still a puppy in many ways. Energetic, sometimes destructive, and he's so bonded with Mason now." Eleanor nodded, understanding the unspoken worry. "The separation would be difficult for both of them, I won't pretend otherwise. But I live less than 15 minutes from your new place. You could visit regularly, continue the training sessions. It wouldn't be ideal, but it would keep Chance in Mason's life while you look for a more permanent solution." The proposal was far from perfect, but as their moving date approached with no alternative in sight, it began to seem like their only viable option. "We'll make it work," Ethan said with determined optimism as they packed the last of their belongings the night before the move. "It's temporary. We'll find a pet-friendly place within a few months, get Chance properly certified, and bring him home." Sarah wanted to believe him, but something in her heart rebelled against the idea of separating Mason from the companion who had catalyzed so much progress in his development. The prospect of explaining to a 15-month-old why his beloved dog wouldn't be coming with them seemed impossible. The morning of the move dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect fall day that normally would have lifted their spirits. Friends from their new church had volunteered to help with the heavy lifting, and by mid-afternoon, most of their belongings had been transported to the duplex in Cedar Ridge. As the last box was loaded, Sarah stood in the empty living room, Mason in her arms, looking at the space that had briefly been their sanctuary. Chance sat at her feet, unusually subdued, as if sensing the significance of the day. "It's time," Ethan said gently from the doorway. "Eleanor's waiting for us at her place." The drive to Eleanor's cottage on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge was mostly silent, the weight of the coming separation hanging heavily over them. Mason, strapped into his car seat, babbled happily, unaware of what was to come. Chance sat on the floor at Sarah's feet, his head occasionally rising to check on Mason. Eleanor was waiting on her front porch when they arrived, her face composed but her eyes reflecting their own sadness. Her home was a charming older cottage, surrounded by a large fenced yard, an ideal setting for a dog, Sarah had to admit. She had prepared a comfortable space for Chance in her sunroom, complete with toys, a plush bed, and even framed photos of Mason that she had thoughtfully placed at dog's eye level. "I want him to feel connected to your family, even when you're not here," Eleanor explained, showing them the setup. "And I've cleared my schedule for the next few weeks to help him adjust. We'll focus on maintaining his training routines so he doesn't lose any progress." The moment of parting came too quickly. Sarah knelt on Eleanor's porch, Mason in one arm, her other hand gently stroking Chance's soft fur. "We'll see you soon, boy," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Be good for Eleanor. We'll visit all the time." Mason seemed to sense something was wrong. His usual cheerful demeanor faded as Ethan transferred Chance's leash to Eleanor's hand. He reached toward the puppy, making the distinctive sound, half bark, half word, that he had developed specifically for Chance. The dog whined in response, trying to move back toward Mason, but held in place by Eleanor's gentle but firm grip on his leash. His ears flattened against his head, his entire body expressing the confusion and distress he couldn't verbalize. "Go on now," Eleanor said softly to the Parkers. "Quick goodbyes are kinder in these situations. I'll take good care of him, I promise." Ethan had to practically guide Sarah back to the car, Mason now beginning to cry. In earnest, as he looked back over her shoulder at Chance, the puppy had begun barking, pulling against his leash, his distress evident in every movement. As they drove away, Sarah couldn't hold back her tears any longer. "This is wrong," she said, trying to comfort Mason, who was now sobbing. "We shouldn't be separating them." Ethan reached across to squeeze her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "It's temporary," he repeated, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll find another solution." Their first night in the new duplex was difficult. Mason was inconsolable, wandering from room to room as if searching for his missing companion. He refused to sleep in his crib, screaming whenever they tried to put him down. In the end, Sarah brought him into their bed, where he finally fell into an exhausted slumber around midnight. "We made a mistake," Sarah whispered to Ethan in the darkness. Mason's small body finally relaxed in sleep between them. "I can already see him regressing. The way he wouldn't make eye contact with anyone at dinner, how he stopped using those proto-words he was developing." Ethan sighed, the sound heavy with shared regret. "I know, but what choice did we have? We needed a roof over our heads." The following day brought unexpected news. Eleanor called early in the morning, her voice tight with concern. "Chance isn't doing well," she reported. "He refused food all evening and again this morning. He spent the night by the door whining. I'm worried about him, Sarah." Sarah's heart sank. It was exactly what she had feared. The separation was affecting Chance as profoundly as it was affecting Mason. "What should we do?" she asked, watching as Mason listlessly pushed cereal around his high chair tray, a marked contrast to his usual enthusiastic breakfast behavior. "I think you should bring Mason over as soon as possible," Eleanor suggested. Let them see each other. Reassure them both that they haven't been permanently separated. We can make a regular schedule of visits until a better solution presents itself. The visit that afternoon confirmed their worst fears. The moment Mason and Chance saw each other, the change in both was dramatic. Mason's entire demeanor transformed. He smiled, reached out, made the special sound that was uniquely Chance's. The puppy, who had been lethargic and uninterested in Eleanor's attempts to engage him in training, suddenly came alive, his entire body wiggling with joy. Eleanor watched the reunion with a mix of professional interest and personal concern. "The bond between them is even stronger than I realized," she observed. "This isn't just a child attached to a pet or even a service dog relationship. There's something deeper happening here." As they were preparing to leave another heart-wrenching separation, Eleanor pulled Sarah aside. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low enough that Ethan, who was helping Mason say goodbye to Chance, couldn't hear. "There might be another option we haven't considered." Sarah looked at her questioningly. "What kind of option?" Eleanor hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Let me make some calls first. If it's possible, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Can you come by again tomorrow afternoon, around 3? Sarah nodded, curious but willing to grasp at any potential solution. "Of course, we'll be here." As they drove back to their new home, Sarah found herself filled with a cautious hope. Whatever Eleanor was planning, it had to be better than the current situation that was clearly causing both Mason and Chance to suffer. "Eleanor wants us to come back tomorrow," she told Ethan. "She said she might have another option for us." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the road. "Another option for what? Housing, Chance's training?" "She didn't say," Sarah admitted, "but she seemed, I don't know, determined, like she had an idea she wasn't quite ready to share." That night, as they again struggled to settle Mason without his canine companion, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what Eleanor might propose. Perhaps she knew of a pet-friendly rental that had just become available. Maybe she had connections who could expedite Chance's service dog certification. Whatever it was, Sarah found herself praying it would be the solution they so desperately needed. Little did she know that Eleanor's plan would far exceed any possibility she had considered, or that the path forward would involve revelations about Eleanor herself that would change their understanding of the extraordinary connection between Mason and Chance. When the Parkers arrived at Eleanor's cottage the following afternoon, they were surprised to find another vehicle. Parked in the driveway, a sleek silver SUV with government plates. Sarah and Ethan exchanged curious glances as they helped Mason out of his car seat. Inside, they found a tall, distinguished-looking woman with silver-streaked, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a tailored navy suit that exuded authority and professionalism. Chance lay at her feet, remarkably calm compared to his usual excited greeting when Mason arrived. "This is Dr. Rebecca Harlow," Eleanor introduced them. "She's the director of the National Service Animal Training Center in Knoxville and an old friend." Dr. Harlow rose to shake their hands. "Eleanor has told me quite a bit about your situation. When she calls with an unusual case, I pay attention." For the next hour, Dr. Harlow observed the interactions between Mason and Chance, occasionally asking questions about specific behaviors or responses. She made notes on a tablet, her expression remaining professionally neutral despite the remarkable demonstrations of Chance's intuitive understanding of Mason's needs. "Eleanor mentioned you're having housing difficulties because of pet restrictions," Dr. Harlow said finally. "Without official certification, many landlords are reluctant to make exceptions." "That's exactly our problem," Sarah nodded. "They're both suffering from the separation." Dr. Harlow leaned forward, her expression serious. What if I told you there might be a way to resolve this situation that benefits everyone involved, including many other families like yours? The Parkers looked at her expectantly. At the National Center, we're always looking for animals with special aptitudes that could benefit our training programs. Dogs like Chance are exceptionally rare. His natural protective instincts, combined with his heightened sensory abilities, make him an ideal candidate for our breeding program. Sarah felt a sudden chill. Are you suggesting you want to take Chance away from us? From Mason? Not at all, Dr. Harlow quickly clarified. The National Center has a satellite facility program where specially selected animals remain with their families while participating in controlled breeding and training initiatives. The families receive support, including housing in specially designed communities near our regional centers. The center would provide housing for your family near their Eastern Tennessee facility, Eleanor explained. Chance would remain with Mason, continuing his training, while occasionally participating in the breeding program to pass on his exceptional genetics. Families in the program receive stipends to cover the costs associated with raising and training these special animals, Dr. Harlow added. Many of our participant families are able to transition to part-time employment as a result. What would be expected of us? Ethan asked cautiously. You would need to commit to a structured training program for Chance, working closely with our specialists, regular evaluations, health screenings, and participation in research studies. When Chance reaches maturity, he would participate in the breeding program a few times a year, but would remain primarily focused on his role as Mason's companion. After Dr. Harlow departed, Eleanor served tea in her sunroom, giving the Parkers space to process the unexpected proposal. There's something I haven't told you, Eleanor said finally, her voice dropping to a near whisper, something that perhaps I should have shared earlier. Sarah and Ethan looked at her with renewed curiosity. This house was my family home. 6 months ago, I rented it to a young couple with a golden retriever. They disappeared one night without notice, leaving behind their pregnant dog. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Chance's mother? Eleanor nodded solemnly. I found her the next morning, already in labor. I helped deliver her puppies, cared for them for the first few weeks. But at my age, taking on 5 puppies and their mother was more than I could manage alone. I had arranged homes for them all, but the night before the last puppy was to be collected, someone broke into my shed where the puppies were being kept. I assume it was the original owners coming back for valuable breeding stock. They took all the puppies, or thought they did. Somehow, Chance had wandered out earlier and was exploring under the porch. They missed him. I was frantic when I discovered the theft. I searched everywhere, finally finding Chance under the porch. But I knew they might come back for him. I was leaving the next day for a 6-week visit to my sister in Arizona. In a moment of panic, She hesitated, looking slightly embarrassed. I put him in a box and left him near the old trail behind your rental home. I thought someone would find him quickly, give him a good home. Until you saw us at the cafe, Sarah realized, and heard me talking about a special puppy that Mason had somehow found. Eleanor nodded, tears forming in her eyes. When you described him, the markings, the unusual alertness, the bond with Mason, I knew it had to be him. The puppy I had tried to save, somehow finding his way to exactly the right child. Rather than anger, Sarah felt a strange sense of completion, as if the final piece of a complex puzzle had clicked into place. That's why you approached us, why you offered to help with his training. Partly out of guilt, yes, Eleanor admitted, but mostly because I recognized how special that connection was. In all my years of training service animals, I've rarely seen anything like it. a natural, intuitive bond that formed almost instantly. That evening, after returning to their duplex, Sarah and Ethan talked long into the night. They weighed the pros and cons of Dr. Harlow's offer, considered the implications of Eleanor's revelation, and most importantly, reflected on what would best serve Mason's needs. By morning, their decision was made. 3 days later, after reviewing the detailed program information and conducting their own research, they accepted the offer. The transition happened with surprising speed. Within 2 weeks, they had moved into a charming 3-bedroom home in a quiet community on the outskirts of Knoxville. The neighborhood was purpose-built for families participating in the program, with specially designed features to accommodate various disabilities and needs. Chance, officially registered as a service animal in training, was finally reunited with Mason on a permanent basis. Eleanor, to their surprise, announced her intention to relocate to Knoxville as well. "Dr. Harlow has been trying to lure me out of retirement for years," she explained with a wink. "I've agreed to work as a consultant for the program." 6 months into their new life, the changes were remarkable. Mason, now approaching his 2nd birthday, had made developmental leaps that astonished his new medical team. His vocabulary had expanded significantly. His eye contact and social engagement had improved not just with his parents, but with the therapists and specialists who now worked with him regularly. Chance, growing from puppy to young dog with impressive discipline, had begun formal certification training while maintaining his primary role as Mason's companion. His exceptional hearing had proven invaluable not just for Mason, but as part of the research being conducted at the center. "I never imagined our lives taking this direction," Sarah commented to Ethan one evening as they watched Mason and Chance play in the yard. "A year ago, we were in that tiny Nashville apartment, both of us stressed and unhappy, worried about Mason's future." Ethan nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "And now look at us. Part of a cutting-edge program, Mason thriving, you teaching part-time at the community college, me actually enjoying my work again. All because of a puppy in a box," Sarah mused, watching as Chance gently guided Mason away from a dip in the yard. Or maybe because of Eleanor's mistake that turned out not to be a mistake at all. 1 year to the day after Mason had first encountered Chance at the edge of the stream, the Parkers held a small celebration in their backyard. Eleanor was there, as were Dr. Harlow and several specialists who had become part of their support system. Mason, now steady on his feet and beginning to string words together, moved through the gathering with confidence, Chance always at his side. "I have something for you," Eleanor said, presenting Sarah with a small wrapped package. Inside was a beautifully crafted picture frame containing a photograph of Mason and Chance just days after their reunion. The child and puppy were captured in a moment of perfect connection, Mason's hand gently resting on Chance's head, both of them gazing at each other with an understanding that transcended words. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the yard, Sarah watched her son navigate the gathering with growing confidence. Chance remained vigilant but unobtrusive, alert to Mason's needs without constraining his independence. The story that had begun with uncertainty at the edge of a stream had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. As Mason's laughter joined with the gentle evening breeze, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that they had found not just a house or a program, but a true home, a place where abilities were recognized rather than limitations, where connections were nurtured rather than questioned, and where second chances could become new beginnings. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility, as the extraordinary partnership between a boy and his dog continued to reveal its potential. Not just for their family, but for countless others who would benefit from the path they were helping to forge. one careful step and one gentle bark at a time. Dear listeners, we hope Mason and Chance's remarkable journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. The extraordinary bond between a child and his special companion reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful connections come when we least expect them, through circumstances we could never have planned.